The first thing I heard was the leash hit the cobblestones, and I knew, the way you know a thing in your blood before your mind has caught up to it, that the man who had dropped it meant for me to be afraid. I'm a sentry of the household foot of Eldermore, and my name, for what it is worth in a story like this, is Corporal Edwin Thorne. I have stood my post at the south gate of Harrowgate Palace for 11 years. In that time I have learned that there are two kinds of men who come to test the guard. The first kind does it by accident. They lean too close, they wave a hand in your face, they shout a foolish question, and when you do not move they grow bored and drift away, and no harm is done to anyone. The second kind comes with a plan. He has thought about it. He has imagined it in his head the night before, lying awake in his hotel bed with his phone in his hand, and he has decided, in the cold and selfish quiet of his own mind, that he will make the man in the red tunic do something, anything, so that the whole world can watch. The man who dropped the leash was the second kind. I had seen him for the better part of 40 minutes before he ever did it, which is the part most people who saw the clip afterward never understood. They thought it happened all at once, a bolt from a clear sky. It did not. Nothing that matters ever does. He had been working up to it the whole morning, and I, standing motionless in my box at the mouth of the south gate with my rifle at my shoulder and my eyes fixed on the middle distance, had watched every step of it the way you watch weather coming off the moor slowly, and then not slowly at all. He was a broad man, perhaps 35, in an expensive jacket the color of a kingfisher and white shoes that had never seen a day's honest dirt. He wore sunglasses pushed up into hair that had been arranged to look as though it had not been arranged. Around his neck hung a small black camera on a strap, and in one hand he carried a long folding pole with a phone clamped to the end of it, the kind people use to film themselves from a flattering height. And at his heel, on a thick-studded leash, walked a bulldog. I want to tell you about the dog first, because the dog is the whole of it, and because the dog never did one wrong thing in its life. It was a stocky English bulldog, fawn and white, with a broad, worried face and a low, heavy gait, the kind of dog that breathes loudly and means nothing by it. It could not have been more than 3 years old. It wore a harness too tight across the chest, and a collar studded with cheap brass, and it walked the way dogs walk when they have learned that the world is mostly noise they cannot control, head down, shoulders rolling, eyes flicking up at its master every few steps to read what mood it would be punished or praised for next. I have seen a great many dogs at that gate. Soldiers' dogs, the Queen's own spaniels, the great wolfhounds the gamekeepers bring down from the northern forests. I know a frightened dog when I see one, and that bulldog was frightened of its own man long before it was ever frightened of me. Its name I would learn later, when all of it was over and the magistrate read it aloud from a charge sheet, was Tank. The man had named his dog Tank. That tells you very nearly everything you need to know about the man. The crowd that morning was thick. It was the last week of the midsummer fair, and the forecourt before the south gate was packed 3 and 4 deep along the gilded railings, families with small children up on shoulders, old couples in their summer best, schoolboys in matching caps, and everywhere, the phones. 100 bright little rectangles held up to catch the guard. That is the world I stand in now. When I first took the post, a man with a camera was a rare and faintly comic thing. Now there is a lens on me from the moment I march out until the moment I march in, and a sentry who forgets it for even a moment is a sentry who will learn his lesson on the front page. I had not forgotten it. I never forget it. That is the first discipline before the stillness, before the rifle drill, before any of the rest. You assume always that you are being watched, and you decide, long before the test ever comes, that the watching will find nothing in you but the post and the duty and the king's peace kept. The man in the kingfisher jacket had begun, as that kind always does, with the small things. He had stood directly in front of my box and made faces. He had crossed his eyes and let his tongue loll and held his phone up close to my face, narrating in a bright carrying voice for whoever it was on the other end of that little glass window. He won't move. He literally won't move. Watch this. Watch, watch. And when I did not move, he had laughed too loudly and looked around at the crowd to see if they were laughing with him. A few were. Most were not. That is a thing the second kind of man never seems to understand until it is too late. The crowd is not on his side. The crowd has come to see the guard, not the fool. Then he had tried touching. He flicked the brim of nothing an inch from my eyes. He reached out and pretended to straighten the collar of my tunic and snatched his hand back, hooting, as though he had dared something brave. He waved his hand flat in front of my face, slow, then fast. The dog, at his feet, flinched each time its master's voice went up and pressed itself a little closer to the cobbles. I did not move. I will tell you plainly that I felt a great deal. I am not a statue, whatever the brochures say. I am a man of 41 with a wife named Hannah and a daughter named Pip who is 6 and thinks her father guards the Queen's biscuits. But I felt it the way you feel deep water under a boat, far down and not touching you, because I had decided long before that morning that nothing this man could do with his hands or his voice would be allowed up to the surface where the cameras could find it. What he could do with the dog was another matter, and he was, I could see now, working his way toward the dog. He crouched. He made a show of fussing over Tank, ruffling the broad, worried head, holding the phone down low to get the dog and the towering red sentry in the same frame. "You want to say hi to the soldier," he said, in that voice grown men use when they are about to do something cowardly and want it to sound like play. "You want to say hi, go on, go say hi." And his thumb went down to the clasp of the leash. I saw it. I saw the thumb find the metal catch. I saw the dog's eyes come up, uncertain, reading the change in the man's hands, not understanding it, never having been asked for this before in its short, anxious life. And in the half-second before the clasp gave way, 11 years of standing still told me exactly what was about to happen, and exactly what I was going to have to do about it. The clasp gave way. I want to slow this part down, because in my memory it is the slowest part of all, though it cannot have taken more than a few seconds in the world where clocks run. The leash dropped. It struck the cobbles with a small flat sound, the studded handle bouncing once, and the dog Tank stood for a heartbeat exactly where it had been standing, because a dog that has been kept on a leash its whole life does not always understand at once that the leash is gone. Freedom, when you have never had it, is a frightening thing. I know that better now than I did then. Then the man did the thing that turned a stupid prank into a crime. He did not simply let the dog go and see what it would do. He clapped his hands hard twice, a sharp cracking sound right beside the dog's ear, and he shoved his open palm toward me, toward my legs, my box, the red of my tunic, and he barked out a word, a hard, ugly word I will not write, the word men use to set a dog on a thing. He set his frightened animal at me to get his clip. He aimed it like a stone. The dog bolted. It did not bolt the way a vicious dog bolts, low and silent and meaning murder. It bolted the way a terrified animal bolts when the only world it has ever known has just become unbearable, sideways at first, scrabbling on the smooth stone, claws skidding, and then forward, toward the only large still thing in a sea of shrieking strangers, which was me. 40 pounds of panicked muscle coming straight at my post, its breath sawing, a thin, high sound coming out of it that was not a growl at all. It was a cry. And around us, in that same instant, the whole forecourt came apart. A woman screamed. Somewhere to my left a man shouted, "Loose dog, loose dog," and the cry went down the line of the railings like fire through dry grass. The crowd, 3 and 4 deep, surged backward all at once, and a surging crowd is a far more dangerous animal than any bulldog ever born. I heard a child cry out. I heard the iron railing groan as bodies pressed against it. I saw, at the edge of my vision, an old man stumble and a younger one catch him by the arm. And 100 phones, which a moment before had been filming a joke, swung as one to film whatever was about to happen to the soldier and the dog. Here is what the man with the kingfisher jacket wanted. He wanted me to do one of three things. He wanted me to flinch and run, so that the world could laugh at the toy soldier who broke. Or he wanted me to lash out, to swing the butt of my rifle, to kick, to strike that frightened animal down in front of the cameras, so that the world could watch a brute in a red coat beat a dog, and the headline would write itself and his little film would travel to the ends of the earth. Or he wanted the dog to reach me and bite, so that there would be blood and noise and a story. 3 doors, and behind every one of them somebody got hurt, me, or the dog, or the crowd, or all 3. He had built a trap with 3 doors and no 4th. I had perhaps a second and a half to find the 4th. The thing they do not teach you about discipline, the thing you only learn after years of standing inside it, is that discipline is not the absence of motion. It is the perfect economy of it. It is knowing, in the half-breath when every other man would do the loud wrong thing, the one small right thing, and doing only that, and nothing more. I had stood still for 40 minutes so that the world could see a man who would not be provoked. Now I would have to move, and the whole art of it, the whole of 11 years, was going to come down to moving in a way that protected everyone, including the very dog that had been thrown at me like a weapon. So I made my choice, and I will tell you now before I tell you how, that it was not the choice the man with the camera was hoping to film. It was not, in the end, the choice anyone in that crowd expected, but I did not make it for them. I made it for the dog. I dropped, not back down. I let the rifle come off my shoulder in a single controlled movement. Not raised, never raised. A rifle raised toward a crowd or a creature would have been a catastrophe of its own. But lowered, grounded, the butt set gently on the cobbles, and the barrel held vertical and harmless at my side. The way we are drilled to ground arms in the half-second when the weapon must become the least dangerous thing on the field. And as I grounded it, I went to one knee on the stone, low, so that I was no longer a towering red column of a thing bearing down on a frightened animal, but small and level and quiet. A standing man is a threat to a panicked dog. A standing man in a strange tall hat, twice the dog's height looming, is the most frightening shape in the world. So I unmade myself. I took away the thing the man had built, the terror of the looming red soldier, and in its place I put a kneeling man with his hand turned palm down and low, not reaching, not grabbing, just there, and I made my whole body soft, and I waited, and I spoke. I had perhaps 3 words before the dog reached me. Easy, I said, low, not a command. A command was what the man had given, that hard, ugly bark. The dog had had a lifetime of hard, ugly barks, and they had taught it nothing but fear. I gave it the opposite of its master's voice. Easy, easy now. Steady. It is a strange thing to set down on paper, but I have had a great deal of time since that day to think about why it worked, and I believe it is this. That frightened dog had been running toward me because I was the largest still thing in a world gone to chaos, and the moment I made myself small and low and quiet, I stopped being the thing it was running at and became the thing it was running to. There is no animal alive, I think, dog or man, that in the middle of terror does not want, more than anything, one calm low voice that asks nothing of it. Tank hit me. It was not a bite. I knew it would not be a bite the moment I saw its eyes, because a dog that means to bite does not cry as it comes. It collided with my grounded shoulder and my chest, 40 pounds of skidding panic, and it was scrabbling and breathing in great ragged heaves, and for one instant its broad worried head was at my throat, and I felt its hot breath and the wet of its loose jowls and the trembling, the whole animal trembling like a struck bell, and I did not grab it. I want that understood. I did not seize it or pin it or strike it. I let it come into me, and I brought one hand up slow along its side flat, and I kept the other low, and I kept talking, the same 3 or 4 soft words, over and over, until the words stopped meaning anything and became only a sound, a low, steady human sound, the sound a frightened creature climbs out of the dark on. Easy, good, good lad, steady, there. There now. And the dog, God help me, I have thought about this 1,000 times. The dog stopped. It did not run on past me into the screaming crowd, which is what would have happened if I had flinched or struck, and which would have ended in a trampling I do not like to imagine. It did not whirl and snap. It pressed itself against my chest, this animal that had been thrown at me as a weapon, and it shook, and it pushed its broad, ugly, beautiful head up under my chin the way a dog does when it has decided, all at once and with its whole heart, that it is safe. I knelt there on the cobblestones of the south gate with my rifle grounded and a stranger's terrified bulldog shivering against my chest, and I held it the way I would hold any frightened thing, and around us the noise began, very slowly, to change. I should tell you, while the dog catches its breath against me and the crowd catches its own, who I was before I was the man kneeling on the cobblestones. Not for vanity, for the sake of understanding why I knew the things I knew in that second and a half, because none of it was luck, and I will not let it be remembered as luck. I came to the household foot the long way. I was not one of the polished boys who come up through the cadet academies and the right regiments and the right families. My father kept dogs, gun dogs, working dogs, dogs for the great estates up north, and I was raised among them. And the first thing my father ever taught me before I could properly read was that a frightened animal is the most dangerous animal there is and the most easily saved, and that the difference between the danger and the saving is entirely in the man. "A dog reads you, Eddie," he used to say, with his hand on some shivering young setter that had been beaten by its last owner. "Whatever you bring, it brings back. You bring fear, you get teeth. You bring quiet, you get a friend. There's no third thing." He died when I was 19, and I have forgotten the sound of his voice, but I have never once forgotten that, because it is true of dogs and it is true of men, and it turned out, on a bright crowded morning 11 years into my service, to be the truest thing anyone ever taught me. Before the Guard I served 9 years in the Eldermore Rifles, including 2 with the dog-handling section, where the Army trains its working dogs and the men who run them. I have brought down a panic-tracking hound in a minefield. I have crawled into a collapsed building behind a search dog that would let no other man near it. I have learned, in places I do not talk about over supper, exactly how a frightened animal moves and exactly how to be the still point it steers toward instead of the threat it flees. The brochures say the Guard is chosen for stillness. That is true. But some of us were chosen, too, for what we could do in the half-second after the stillness ends, and the men who placed me at that gate knew my record, and I have wondered since whether some quiet officer somewhere had read it and thought, "That one. Put that one where the storm comes." So when the leash hit the stone, I was not an ornamental soldier surprised by a dog. I was a dog man in a red coat, and the worst morning of that tourist's life was the morning he set a frightened animal at the one sentry in the whole household, who had spent his boyhood and half his manhood learning precisely how to bring it home unharmed. But he did not know that yet. None of them did. The man with the kingfisher jacket and the phone on the pole was still standing there with his stupid grin frozen on his face, because the thing on his screen was not the thing he had paid for. He had filmed himself, in front of 300 witnesses, setting a dog on a soldier, and the soldier had not run, and the soldier had not struck, and the soldier was now kneeling on the cobbles cradling that man's own trembling dog like a father with a child, murmuring to it, while the dog burrowed into him as though it had finally found the one safe place in all the world. And the crowd, which the man had imagined would be laughing, had gone entirely, terribly quiet. Then somewhere in that quiet, a single woman's voice, shaking with anger, said the words that would end up echoing through everything that came after. She said, "He let it go. I saw him. He let the dog go on purpose." And 300 phones, every one of them, turned away from me and toward him. I did not see all of what followed in that first minute, because I was busy with the dog, and the dog was the only thing in the world that mattered to me just then. But I have since watched the footage, a great deal of it, more of it than any man should have to watch of his own worst morning, and I have spoken to the people who were standing close enough to hear, and so I can tell it whole. The man's name was Roland Pike. He was, it would come out later, the sort of man who made his living being looked at. He had a following on the picture sites and the video sites that ran into the hundreds of thousands, and he had built it doing exactly the sort of thing he was doing that morning, going to places where there were rules and decorum and people behaving with dignity, and breaking them loudly for the camera and calling it comedy. He had a series. He called it Watch Me Get a Reaction. He had filmed himself shouting in libraries and lying down in the middle of grand staircases, and pretending to faint at funerals of people he did not know. And every time, the more outraged the people around him became, the more money the little numbers under his videos made him. He had flown to Eldermore, he had said openly to his followers the night before, to finally crack one of those statue guards. Those were his words. The police would read them aloud later. He had announced his crime to 200,000 people before he committed it, and he had thought that was clever. So when the woman's voice cut across the quiet, he let the dog go on purpose. Roland Pike did the only thing a man like Roland Pike knows how to do. He performed. "Whoa, whoa, no," he said, hands up, that bright carrying voice going wide and innocent for the cameras he had spent his whole life loving. He slipped his leash. I didn't, guys, he slipped his leash, did you see that? Bad clasp, cheap clasp. Look, and he held up the empty leash and shook it, smiling, looking around for someone to laugh with. Tank, come here, buddy, come on." The dog did not so much as lift its head. It was pressed into my chest with its eyes shut, breathing slower now, slower, and at the sound of its master's voice it did the thing that broke the last of the crowd's patience. It shrank. It flattened itself against me and pushed its head harder under my arm, hiding, the way a dog hides from the hand it has learned to fear. 300 people saw a frightened animal recoil from the man calling it buddy. And 300 people understood, all at once and without a word spoken among them, exactly what kind of man they were looking at. It's all good, Pike was saying, his smile working harder now, sweat starting at his temples. "No harm done. Look, soldiers fine, dogs fine, everybody's fine, it's all just," he laughed. "It came out wrong, high and thin. It's content, right? It's just content." That was the word, content. He said it to 300 people who had just watched a man weaponize a terrified animal, and he said it as though that explained everything, as though that made it all right, because in the world Roland Pike lived in, it did. Everything was content. The dog's fear was content. My discipline was content. The screaming and the surging crowd and the old man who had nearly been crushed against the railing. All of it was just raw material for the little glowing numbers, and he genuinely, sincerely did not understand why nobody was laughing. I have thought a great deal about that since, about how a man can stand in the middle of his own cruelty and not see it because his eyes have been trained, for years, to look only at the camera. I do not hate Roland Pike. I want to be honest about that, because I think the easy thing, the thing the footage invited the whole world to do, was to hate him, and I will not pretend I did not feel a clean hot flush of anger kneeling there with his terrified dog in my arms. But hate is a luxury for men who are not on duty. What I felt mostly underneath the anger was a kind of cold, clear certainty, the certainty you feel when a situation has stopped being chaos and become, instead, a problem with a correct answer. And the correct answer, I knew, was not for me to stand up and seize Roland Pike by his expensive collar, however much 300 people would have cheered. The correct answer was the law and the post and the dog. In that order, more or less. The dog first always, but the law not my hands. Because that was the second trap, you see, and it was subtler than the first. The first trap had 3 doors and every one of them hurt someone. But there was a 4th door now, and it had opened all on its own, and it was tempting and it was wrong. The 4th temptation was this, that I was the wronged man and the crowd was on my side, and the cameras were rolling, and I could rise up in my righteous red anger and become, just for a moment, the avenger they wanted. I could give the people the satisfaction. I could give Roland Pike a shove, a hard word, a soldier's contempt, and the crowd would roar and the clip would be glorious and everyone would say the guard had taught the fool a lesson. And it would have been a disaster, because the moment a king's guard lays an angry hand on a citizen, any citizen, even a deserving one, even a cruel one, the story changes. It stops being a story about a coward who set a dog on a soldier. It becomes a story about a soldier who lost his discipline, and Roland Pike, who had wanted exactly that all morning, would have his clip after all. Different clip, same victory. The man does not care whether you laugh at him or at me, so long as the camera catches a soldier breaking. Either one is content. Either one is a win for him. So I would not break, not in the loud way and not in the quiet way either. I would do the harder thing, the thing that does not make a good clip, the thing that wins nothing in the moment and everything in the end. I would stay disciplined. I would protect the dog, keep the post, and let the law, slow, certain, lawful, do to Roland Pike what my hands must never do. But I am getting ahead of myself, because in that minute on the cobblestones I did not yet know how it would go, and the situation was very far from settled. A loose dog incident at a royal gate, in a crowd of hundreds, with a soldier off his feet and a panic running through the railings. That is not a thing that resolves itself with one kind word to one frightened animal. There were people who had been hurt in the surge. There were children separated from parents. There was a man with a phone on a pole, still performing innocence, 2 strides from my post. And there was, coming up fast behind all of it, the machinery of the palace itself, which does not take kindly to chaos at its gates, and which was about to descend on the south gate in the persons of men whose first concern, I knew from long experience, would not be the dog nor even the truth, but order restored, the incident contained, the cameras managed. And some of those men, I knew, would look at a kneeling sentry off his post with a strange dog in his arms and a frightened crowd and 100 phones recording, and they would see, not a crisis well handled, but a sentry who had abandoned his position. The first of them was already shouting my name. Thorne. A voice I knew, hard and clipped, cutting through the crowd murmur from the direction of the gatehouse. Corporal Thorne, on your feet. It was Sergeant Major Crail. I should tell you about Crail, because for the next hour he was the second storm I had to weather, and because he is not, in the end, a villain in this story, though he came close to becoming one. Sergeant Major Bartholomew Crail was the senior non-commissioned man of our detachment, 26 years in the household, a man built entirely of right angles and regulation. He had a face like the flat of a spade and a voice that could strip paint, and he believed, with a sincerity that was almost holy, that the entire dignity of the crown rested upon every man jack of us doing precisely what the standing orders said, precisely when they said it, and not 1 inch otherwise. He was not a cruel man. He was something more difficult than cruel. He was a man for whom the rule was the whole of the good, and who had never in his life had to choose between the rule and the thing the rule was made to protect, because in 26 years, those two things had never once pulled in different directions. Until now. The standing orders for a sentry are very clear, and Crail knew them the way other men know their own name. A sentry does not leave his post. A sentry does not ground his arms except on command. A sentry does not engage with the public, does not kneel, does not handle animals, does not, under any circumstances short of fire or armed assault on the royal person, abandon the position he has been set to hold. I had, in the space of about 4 seconds, broken nearly every one of those orders at once. I had grounded my rifle without command. I had gone off my feet. I had left, in the only sense that mattered to Crail, my post, and I had done it in front of 300 cameras. From where Crail stood, marching out of the gatehouse with 2 more of our men at his heels, he could not yet see what I could feel, the dog slowing hard against my chest, the disaster I had just steered the whole forecourt away from. He could see only the surface of it, chaos at the gate, a sentry on the ground, A soldier of the household kneeling in the dirt with his weapon down and his bearskin knocked askew, cradling some stranger's animal while a man with a camera capered nearby, and the crowd boiled. To Crail, that picture meant one thing and one thing only. It meant a man had broken. "On your feet, Corporal." He had reached me now. He stood over me rigid, his own face a careful mask for the cameras, but his eyes, when they met mine, full of a cold, incredulous fury. "Recover your weapon. Resume your post. Now." And here was my third trap, and it was the hardest of all, harder than the dog and harder than the temptation to strike, because it was a lawful order from a man I respected, given in good faith, and obeying it would have been very nearly fatal. If I stood up now, if I rose, all 6'2" of me suddenly, sharply, to recover my weapon and snap to attention, the dog would lose in a single instant the only safety it had found. A frightened animal that has just begun to calm, yanked back into terror by the abrupt rising of the very shape it had been fleeing, in a crowd still primed to bolt. It would scramble, it would run, and this time there would be no kneeling man to steer it. It would go into the crowd, and 40 pounds of panicked dog driving into 300 packed and frightened people is how children get trampled. I had not knelt on the cobbles to make a tender picture for the cameras. I had knelt because it was the only thing standing between this morning and a real catastrophe, and standing up too soon would undo all of it. But you do not say no to a sergeant major of 26 years in front of 300 phones. You do not, if you have any sense, say no to him at all. I said no. I said it quietly. I said it without lifting my eyes from the dog, because to lift my eyes would have been to take my voice off the animal, and the voice was the leash now, the only one it had. "Sergeant Major," I said, low and even, the same register I was using on the dog, because the truth is I was managing 2 frightened creatures now, and only one of them had 4 legs. "I cannot stand up. Not yet. If I stand, this dog bolts into the crowd. There are children in that crowd. Give me 60 seconds and I will hand the animal off safe and recover my post. 60 seconds, Sergeant Major. I am asking you to trust me for 60 seconds. I felt rather than saw the whole forecourt hold its breath. A corporal had just refused a direct order from the senior man of the detachment, in the open, on camera. In 26 years, I do not think anyone had ever said the word no to Bartholomew Crail and meant it. The 2 men at his back went very still. Somewhere a phone zoomed in with that small electronic whine. And Roland Pike, sensing with the unerring instinct of his kind that the drama had just found a new and better stage, swung his pole camera around to catch the soldier defying his own commander, and breathed, half to himself, the most damning words he would ever speak. "Oh, this is even better." Crail's jaw worked. I knew what was happening behind that spade-flat face. The rule said, arrest this man for refusing an order, recover the post, restore order at any cost. 26 years of the rule being the whole of the good said, do it now, do it hard, make an example, the dignity of the crown demands it. Everything he was, everything he had built himself into, said haul this insubordinate corporal to his feet. And some other thing, some older, deeper thing under the regulation, the thing that had made him a good man before it made him a rigid one, must have heard in my voice that I was not defying him for pride, that I was not broken, that I was, in fact, in the middle of the most controlled act of duty he had ever witnessed, and only looked like chaos because he could not yet see the dog's slowing breath. He did not give me the 60 seconds. I will not pretend he rose to it in that moment. He did not. Crail was not a man who could turn on a coin, and the rule had too strong a grip on him. What he did instead was worse and better at once. "You have 10, he said through his teeth. 10 seconds, Corporal, and then I recover you myself, and God help you afterward." He straightened. He turned to the men at his back. "Clear a lane. Move the public back from the railing, gently, no shoving. We are on every camera in the realm. You get the gatehouse on the wire." I want the duty officer, and I want the dog warden, and I want this entire forecourt under control in 2 minutes. And then, lower, only for me, in a voice that had something in it I had never heard from him in 11 years, not warmth. Crail did not do warmth, but a kind of furious uncertainty, a man feeling the rule pull against the good for the first time in his life and hating it. If you are wrong about this, Thorn, it is both our necks. You understand me? Both. 10 seconds. I looked down at the dog. 10 seconds is not enough time to calm a frightened animal. Any dog man will tell you that. You cannot rush trust. The rushing is the very thing that breaks it. But 10 seconds was what I had, and I have learned that you do not waste the time you have grieving the time you do not. I did not try to make the dog calm in 10 seconds. I tried instead to make the handoff safe, which is a different and smaller and possible thing. I needed a pair of hands the dog would accept. Somewhere lower and gentler than mine would be once I had to rise, and I needed them in the next breath. And the strange grace of that morning, there is always a grace, I have found, if you are looking for it instead of for an enemy, was that the hands were already there. She had come forward out of the crowd while Crail and I spoke, slipping under the arm of one of our men as he tried to move the public back, and she had crouched at the edge of my vision without my fully marking her, the way you half notice the one calm person in a panicking room. She was an older woman, 60 perhaps, broad and weathered and plainly dressed, with a canvas bag over one shoulder and the unmistakable, unhurried hands of someone who has spent a life around animals. I learned her name within the hour, and I have never forgotten it. Mrs. Agnes Wren, who kept a small rescue kennel out past the Eastern Market and had come up to town that morning only to see the fair, and who would tell the magistrate, in the plainest voice you ever heard, exactly what she had seen a man do to a dog. "Soldier," she said to me low, matching my register without being told because she knew, of course she knew. "Soldier, give him here. I've got him. I've had 1,000 like him. Give him to old Agnes, and you do your standing up." I have rarely in my life been so glad of anything as I was of that broad, steady voice. "He's frightened, not fierce," I murmured to her, my hand still flat on the dog's heaving side. "Tight harness hurts him across the chest. Don't lift him by it. Take him low under the belly against you and keep talking. Bless you, I know how to take a dog." There was the ghost of a smile in it. "Go on now, on 3, 1, 2. And on 3 I slid my hands away as she slid hers in, low and sure under the dog's belly and around its chest, gathering it against her own body the way you gather a child that has cried itself out, and the dog let her. It did not bolt. It made one small sound and pressed its broad, worried head into the curve of her shoulder, and old Agnes Wren stood up out of her crouch with 40 pounds of someone else's bulldog held against her chest like the most natural thing in the world, murmuring, there now, you daft lump, you're all right, and walked it, slow and steady, back through the lane our men had cleared, away from the railings, away from the cameras, away from the man who had thrown it like a stone. The handoff took 6 seconds. I had 4 left. I used them to recover. I will tell you, there is a particular feeling in coming up off your knees back into the discipline, and I have never been able to describe it properly to anyone who has not worn the uniform. It is like a tide going back out. For 4 seconds I had been a kneeling man, a soft, low human thing, all my hardness set aside for the sake of a frightened animal, and now, in the space of a breath, I gathered it all back. I took up my grounded rifle in one clean movement, brought it to my shoulder, found my feet, squared my bearskin with a single touch and rose to my full height, and as I rose I felt the man come back over the dog man like armor going back on, and by the time I was standing at my full mark before the south gate I was, once again, the statue. Eyes forward, weapon shouldered, face a still mask. A king's guard at his post, as though nothing at all had happened, except that my tunic was scuffed pale at one knee with the dust of the cobbles, and except that 300 people were now looking at me in a way nobody had ever looked at me in 11 years of standing that post, and except that the whole forecourt had gone so quiet that I could hear, far off down the lane, old Agnes Wren still murmuring to the dog. I had made my 10 seconds, just. Crail looked at me. For one long moment the sergeant major and I held each other's eyes, and I watched the rule and the good wore it out behind his spade-flat face, and I did not know, truly did not know, which one would win. Then he gave a single short nod, the kind of nod that costs a man like Crail a great deal, and turned away to his work of clearing the forecourt, and I understood that I had been granted, for now, a reprieve. Not a pardon, a reprieve. There would be a reckoning for the broken orders. Crail's kind always brings the reckoning. It is what they are for. But it would come later indoors on paper in the proper way, and not here, not now, not in front of the cameras with a frightened crowd to settle, and a man with a phone on a pole still capering at the edge of it all. I thought, standing there, that the worst of it was over. I thought the danger had passed when the dog walked away safe in Agnes Wren's arms. I was wrong. The morning had a great deal more to give, and so did Roland Pike, and so, though I did not yet know his name or his rank or how much grief he was about to cost me, did the man who came through the south gate 20 minutes later in a charcoal gray suit, with a thin smile and a soft voice and a great deal of power, to make this whole thing, as he would put it, go away quietly. Because the trouble with doing the right thing in front of 300 cameras is that it cannot be made to go away quietly. And there are men, powerful men, whose entire purpose is the making of things go away quietly, and who become very dangerous indeed when they meet a thing that will not. But all that was still 20 minutes off. First, the crowd. A crowd that has been frightened does not simply calm down. It has to be given something to do with the feeling, and if you do not give it something, it will find something on its own, and what it finds is rarely good. I have seen frightened crowds turn ugly. I have seen them turn on each other, and once, years ago at a different gate, I saw a frightened crowd turn on a man and very nearly tear him apart before we could reach him, and the man had done nothing at all but be in the wrong place when the fear needed a target. This crowd had a target. It had Roland Pike, and it knew exactly what he had done, and the anger that had been building behind those 300 phones was looking, now, for somewhere to go. I could feel it gathering. The murmur had a new note in it, lower and harder. The woman who had first cried out, "He let the dog go on purpose," had been joined by others, and the others were not murmuring any more. I saw it too. He clapped right in its ear. He said it on the soldier. "I've got it on my phone. Look, somebody get the police. Somebody hold him, don't let him walk off." And a knot of men near the railing, big men, fairground men with the sun on their necks, had begun to drift with a terrible casual purpose toward where Roland Pike stood. Pike felt it too. The performer's instinct that had served him so well all morning had finally caught the change in the room, and for the first time the bright carrying voice faltered. "Okay," he said, backing a half-step, hands still up, the smile gone watery. "Okay, everyone, just, it was a joke. It was a stunt. Nobody got hurt." He looked around for an exit and found the lane our men had cleared and the crowd closing behind him and the big fairground men coming on slow, and the watery smile slid off his face entirely, and underneath it, for the first time, I saw plain ordinary fear. The same fear, I thought, that he had spent all morning manufacturing in a dog. And here is the thing I am least proud of and most glad I did. Because there was a fourth temptation in that moment too, and it was the sweetest of all, and it was this: I could have done nothing. I could have stood at my post, eyes forward, a statue once more, and let the crowd do to Roland Pike what he deserved. It would have been so easy. It would have required only that I keep standing still, the very thing I am trained to do, and the fairground men would have laid hands on him, and the law would have come too late, and nobody in all the world, would have blamed the silent soldier for not intervening. The standing orders, for once, would even have been on the side of doing nothing. A sentry holds his post. The crowd is not his to police. That is the warden's work and the constable's. I could have hidden behind the rule and let the man be hurt, and called it discipline. But it would not have been discipline. It would have been the same cowardice as Pike's, only quieter. using the rule the way he used the camera, as a place to hide while something cruel happened that I could have stopped. And the whole point, the whole entire point of everything I had done that morning, from the moment I went down on one knee, was that I would not let cruelty happen at my gate, not to a dog and not to a fool, not when I could prevent it without dishonor. So I broke my stillness one more time, not by leaving my post. I had learned the lesson of the 10 seconds, but with the one tool a king's guard always has and almost never uses. I used my voice, and I used it at full parade volume, the voice that can carry across a forecourt and stop a regiment, the voice I had spent 11 years never once raising. Hold! It went off across the south gate like a shot. 300 people froze. The fairground men stopped mid-stride. Even Crail, halfway across the forecourt, turned. A king's guard does not speak. Everyone there knew that. It is the first thing anyone knows about us. And so when one of us speaks and speaks like that, it lands with a weight that no constable's whistle could ever carry. For one suspended second I had the entire forecourt in the palm of my hand, and I knew it, and I knew I would have it for only that 1 second, and so I spent it. "This man," I said, not loud now but clear, pitched to carry, my eyes still forward, my rifle still shouldered, every inch the statue except for the words coming level and cold out of the stillness, "will answer for what he has done. He will answer to the law, not to your hands." A pause. The fairground men shifted, uncertain. "You are better than he is," I said. "Show it. Stand back and let the law take him, and let your cameras show the whole world the difference between a man who keeps the peace and a man who breaks it. That is how you beat a man like this. Not with your fists, with the truth. Now stand back." And I still hardly believe it, but I have it on a dozen recordings. They stood back. The fairground men stepped away. The crowd settled not into calm, but into something better than calm, into purpose. 300 phones, which a moment before had been the instruments of a man's vanity, became, all at once, 300 witnesses. I watched them lift again, steadier now, deliberate, recording not a stunt but a crime and its consequence, and I understood that Roland Pike's own weapon had just been turned entirely against him. He had come to Eldermore to make the cameras serve his cruelty. Instead, the cameras would convict him, and there would be no clip in all the world he could not be answered with, because the whole of it, every second, from the dropped leash to the clapped hands to the thrown word to the kneeling soldier and the rescued dog, was now preserved 300 times over in the pockets of the very people he had tried to make complicit. That, I have come to think, is the real reversal of that morning, the one underneath the obvious one. Roland Pike believed the camera was his. He believed it belonged to men like him, the loud, the shameless, the ones willing to do the cruel thing for the clip. And in the space of about 4 minutes at the south gate of Harrogate Palace, 300 ordinary people took the camera back and used it for what it is actually for, which is the truth, and the truth was the end of him. But the law had not yet arrived, and a great deal can go wrong in the gap between a crime and its consequence. And into that gap, as I have said, came the dog warden first, and then, 20 minutes later, the man in the charcoal gray suit. The dog warden I welcomed. The man in the gray suit I did not and could not, and would spend the next many days learning exactly how dangerous a soft-voiced man can be. The warden came at a run.